Welcome to the Early Edge NFL Player Prop Show, brought to you by BetMGM, the sportsbook born in Vegas. I'm your host, Eric Cohen, otherwise known as EC. Glad to have you here. It's week 16. It's a Friday afternoon, or whenever you are listening over the weekend. The holidays are next week, and a lot to be excited about. So let's bring up the recap screen first. Not the greatest thing I've ever seen in my life here. But Uncle Dave lost two props by that much. I lost one by a yard and a half. Probably went 3-1, really good, and Shakir was on pace in a high-scoring game. So we're right there. We're going to do better this week. I feel it. I'm ready to go. So let's bring in the stars of the show, two of the smartest football minds I will ever meet in my entire life, and I'm lucky to share the screen with them every week. We have the Fantasy Hall of Famer, the one, the only, the genius, as I consider him, Uncle Dave Richard from CBS Sports. You are. And we have the best prop bettor that I consider on the planet. You can look at his record on SportsLine. You can check it out in the NBA. He's atop the leaderboard. You can check it out in baseball. He's right up there on the leaderboard, first or second, every day of the season. Just how it is, the one, the only Propstarz. Gentlemen, Proppy, I'll start with you. Just about week 16 props. You're going a little bit lighter on your card this week. Is that done intentionally because some of these lines are more unpredictable?
Yeah, I would say from a predictability standpoint, these lines are sharper. This is something that I had been discussing at length as over the duration of the season. As the season progresses, you'll likely see my volume begin to dwindle or decrease. As the season goes along, the odds makers become sharper and sharper, and I believe there's less and less opportunities. So long, Dave. He was there. Dave's back.
I sneeze.
Good of you to join us, Dave. But yeah, this is something that I've talked at length about, and has been something that, if you've been following me or listening to me, has been a constant throughout my betting career, and something you'll see, frankly, with a lot of professional bettors, especially prop bettors, this also applies to sides and totals as well. So yeah, you'll see volume typically go down because at this stage of the season, the odds makers are fairly sharp.
Uncle Dave, this is a big week for a lot of, obviously, the realm that you're in. It's fantasy football, either finals or semifinals, but it's also an important prop week. Just any tips that you have for anyone that's trying to set lineups, make bets, anything that you have on your plate this week?
You know, the advice is going to be the same for both of those people, EC. Don't get cute. Don't start messing around with props or players that you're not familiar with. I might need to take my own advice on one of my plays this week, but I'm actually rather confident in a player who has broken out over the last couple of weeks. We will talk about that guy. But overall, you don't want to do something with your lineup where you're sitting somebody who may have brought you to this point in your fantasy season. I'll give you an example. Lamar Jackson taking on the Steelers. The track record there is not very good. People are nervous. And then he lost two of his wide receivers. I think he's going to lose two of them for the game. We know that one of them's out. And now people are thinking, well, do I start Jordan Love? Do I start Cooper Rush? Do I go with Anthony Richardson? You're being cute. Don't be cute. All right. Dance with who you brought to the dance. And it should be the same thing in betting. Don't bet like crazy. Don't do anything outlandish. Stay in line. And I think you'll be okay.
I think that's great advice, and I'm all for it. Start your studs is the old theme that when it came to fantasy football. You start your studs, you lose with your studs. Okay, so be it. Robin in the chat says, and I want to read this before we get going here. He says, new to the channel, made some parlay bets last week with y'all's predictions and hit. Came back for more. Well, we got a banger for you later in the show. In honor of Uncle Dave, in honor of, well, probably not so much, in honor of producer Jake, I got a 5-leg kicker parlay for you later in the show for $2, Uncle Dave. Don't worry. Okay. And we'll go over that. We'll talk about that. But let's start off with rushing props. And what's interesting here is we each have one, and they're all 1.5 unit plays. So, Proppy, you're going to start us off. Who is your favorite, or what is your favorite running back play this week?
Yeah, not only is this my favorite running back play, EC and Dave, this is my favorite play thus far that I've come across on the board. And I'm also here to tell you both and all the listeners at home, this is not a trap. This is not a trap. You'll hear Dave often talk about, potentially trap lines and player props. And I'm here to tell you that they do not exist. And when you see a line that you feel like is too good to be true. That's likely because the odds makers, frankly, have such a massive surface area. When you're looking at the amount of sheer volume of props the odds makers are responsible for creating, the amount of lines, we're talking thousands upon thousands. There's just naturally going to be inefficiencies across the board. And if I'm looking at the landscape this week, this looks like this is the biggest inefficiency to me so far, and that's Bucky Irving over 56.5 rushing yards. Bucky Irving has been absolutely fantastic, whether you consider him the 1A or the lead back in Tampa Bay. He's just been tremendous over the last 4 games where he's been the starter. I think you can throw out the Las Vegas game where he had an injury, only lasted about a quarter in there, or less than a quarter in that game. He's handled 16.25 rush attempts, 107.5 rushing yards on 6.6 yards per carry. He's been absolutely tremendous. If we look under the hood as well, he's the RB2 in elusive rating. All of the advanced metrics are very, very, very favorable when we're talking about Bucky Irving. And then on top of that, he's now facing arguably the league's worst rush defense in Dallas, who are 32nd in EPA allowed per rush. So this is a combination of Bucky Irving being undervalued still somehow, which completely befuddles me. And then on top of that, facing a significant run funnel against a porous Dallas run defense, which teams are opting to attack on the ground. So Bucky Irving gets his 15 to 16 to 17 carries, which he has been consistently. He should easily cruise over this 56.5 rushing yards. I've personally opened a significant position on this very line, and I will probably add to it. I expect this one to close at 63 to 65.5. I think we'll see that sort of closing line value between now and Sunday Night Football when this game kicks off. So I would encourage you to run, not walk. If you want this 56.5 number, I'm comfortable playing this one up to 62.5, even 63.5.
We didn't get the word nuclear from Proppy this week, but significant position, as Matt mentions in the chat, is also a buzzword. That's where you got to know when you're listening to Proppy.
That's the low-key nuclear's little cousin that's been,
significant position. As Drew said in the chat, it pays to be a subscriber as this line has skyrocketed since this morning when Proppy made this an official play. So keep that in mind. He changes lines. I said that. It happens. You can look at the sports books, look at the timing of when he put that in, and Drew will tell you this line has gone up for a reason. Now, Uncle Dave and I each have a 1.5 unit play on the same player. But Uncle Dave, it's rare that I'm going to actually go first on this one because I'm going to go James Conner rushing yards over 80.5 at minus 110 for 1.5 units. Carolina's run defense is horrendous. I mean, they are 30 yards worse than any other team in the league. They've given up a 100-yard rusher in 5 of their last 6 games. And in the last 3 weeks, they've given up a rusher who has had 152, 124, and 149. Conner in the last 2, 90 and 100 yards rushing respectively. He is over this number in 7 of 14 games this season. I think he goes over 100 this week. I think he goes nuclear. So for 1.5 units. Uncle Dave, you are taking this to another level. Also for 1.5 units. What do you have?
I like the combo line, over 107.5 rushing and receiving yards at minus 115, and that is from BetMGM. Let's start with the good news. Conner has had at least 122 total yards in each of his past 2 games, 110 plus total yards in 4 of his past 6. Trey Benson, he's out. Imari DiMarcado, he's out. That's more work on James Conner's plate, and we've seen Conner have at least 3 catches in 6 straight games. I said that was the good news. The bad news is there is no bad news, but there is great news that I have to share. The Panthers have given up 5 yards per carry this season. That's tied for the most in football. They are dead last in defensive rushing EPA, defensive rush success rate. Rushing touchdowns allowed, that doesn't really matter here, but I thought I'd throw it in just for funsies. Rate of 0 or negative rush yards allowed, meaning they see or stop running backs at the line of scrimmage or behind at the lowest rate of any team in the National Football League. They are second worst in 5-yard rush rate allowed. So no surprise, offenses average a league most 27.8 running back rushes per game against them. You tack all that together and you realize that Connor's the main guy. Honestly, you see, all I feel like he has to do is stay healthy. And if he stays healthy for 4 quarters, you're going to see him get 110, 115, 120 total yards, somewhere in that range. But most importantly, he will get over 108 total yards. And that's what we're hoping for in this awesome matchup against a terrible Carolina defense.
Do you see this as a ladder opportunity, as I kind of do from a rushing standpoint?
Yes. I'm glad you said from a rushing standpoint. And I don't know if you can even ladder combo lines. My guess is that you can. Proppy says that you can. But I would rather ladder the rushing yardage than the combo.
All right, fair enough. I am excited for James Conner and the Arizona Cardinals on Sunday, and we are so excited collectively as a show that we have 2 more Cardinals props in the next segment after we hear from one of our sponsors.
Sunday, the pressure is on, and when the stakes are high, the elite players shine the brightest. Now that's a CBS Sports Sunday. At halftime of the 425 games, catch a preview of the new series Dexter Original Sin, now streaming on the Paramount Plus with Showtime plan.
All right, it is time for Arizona Cardinal heaven, I guess. If you want some same-game parlays and Proppy's eyes to roll, then that's what this segment's all about. Let's start it off, Proppy. In Carolina, Kyler Murray has a few guys to throw to. Who are you bullish on this week?
First, I do want to say, if there is ever a time to make a parlay, it's a correlated parlay. I try to emphasize that. So if you are going to bet a parlay and you're trying to do it profitably, make it correlated. So I don't hate same-game parlays like I do just 2 things that have nothing in common or relation to each other and pairing them for S's and giggles. But I'm going to talk about a guy that I've actually been down on consistently, maybe not necessarily a lot over the course of the season, but in the preseason, if you've been following us and listening to us, you've heard me talk about this guy at length, and that's Marvin Harrison Jr. I like this spot for him. I think we're getting a good buy low opportunity here. So I'm going to go over 49.5 receiving yards for Marvin Harrison Jr. Listen, he was taken 4th overall in an absolutely loaded, stacked wide receiver class. Much like Caleb Williams, he was thought to make a massive impact right away. Hasn't been the case. He's been, other rookie wide receivers who I loved, have made a bigger impact thus far. But Marvin Harrison, I think there are some signs to be encouraged by. First and foremost, if we look at the ADOT, 14.5 yards. That is a very, very healthy number. That is top 90th percentile at wide receiver. So he's getting targeted down the field. If you're drawing targets down the field, that typically is a good sign. So that is working in his favor. 19% first read target rate. That is 88th percentile. That is also a fairly good number, indicating that the team is making a concerted effort to get him the football and that he is part of the offensive game plan, a major focal point of the offensive game plan. And what happens when you combine, this is a pop quiz time for UEC, what happens when you combine a 14.5 or a deep A dot with a healthy first read target rate, EC? You don't need a lot of volume to make a big impact when you have both those things in your favor here. So when we're looking at 49.5 receiving yards, which is not many, Marvin Harrison just needs 3 or 4 targets realistically to go eclipse this number. And then on top of that, he's facing a Carolina pass defense that ranks in the bottom 5 in literally every defensive passing metric. I mean, this defense is atrocious. Dave talked about how awful they are against the run. While they're one of the arguably the league's worst run defense, they're almost just as bad as a pass defense as well. They're also particularly terrible at stopping first reads and protecting the splash zone, which is where he's primarily operating. And as I mentioned, he's getting a lot of reads or first read targets. So I like this as a buy low spot for him. I think he can get home on just 3, 4 or 5 targets. Obviously, if Carolina is able to push the Cardinals, there's the potential for plenty of more. But yeah, all things considered, this just looks like a very low number, a good opportunity, and what is certainly a good matchup as well to back Marvin Harrison. So I'll buy low on him here. I think it's a good spot to back him over 49.5 receiving yards. I'd play this up to 53.5 receiving yards.
I'd even probably go higher than that, Proppy. That just seems ridiculously low, almost a trap line-esque for that line. I mean, it's because that line is 10 yards lower than I would have thought it was. Now, I'm going to stay in the same game. Yeah, Uncle Dave gave out James Conner combined yards. I gave out James Conner rushing. Proppy gave out Marvin Harrison's receiving total. So the team that gives up the most touchdowns to tight ends, the Carolina Panthers. They've given up 10 this year. Trey McBride holds an NFL record at the moment with 89 catches without a receiving touchdown this season. You're getting plus 135, and these odds are going down. I saw this at plus 120. I mean, anything with plus money, I'm taking a shot here because the Carolina pass defense against tight ends is so bad, and Kyler Murray is forcing him the football like we saw a shovel pass last week. Uncle Dave, I think he finds the end zone this week. Are you feeling it?
Well, I think Kyler Murray's feeling it because he tweeted about it. And I figure that if there was ever a matchup where the Cardinals can do whatever they want to do, this would be it. Next week, they've got the Rams. That's going to be harder. The week after that, it's the 49ers. And then the season's over. So this is their matchup to kind of walk away feeling good about their offense. I'll put it to you another way. If the Cardinals struggle in this game, meaning that there is no passing touchdown at all for them, or if Marvin Harrison doesn't get 50 yards, or if James Conner doesn't get 110 total yards, there's serious problems with this offense. And they have been up and down. But the one thing I know is that Trey McBride has basically worked as their number one receiver for about the last month. And they have tried to get him touchdowns leading up to this game. I think it's a pretty safe bet that they will keep trying, and this could be the week where they get it done. So
Wu-Tang Forever says parlay all three together for plus 550. Those numbers just make me feel so great inside. Let's take a shot at that plus 550. Another game that we're all targeting. Proppy's got a rushing prop with Bucky Irving. I have a passing prop just to tease it later with Baker Mayfield. And you, Uncle Dave, have a receiving prop with Jalen McMillan. Another SGP opportunity. Let's hear it. What do you got?
Yeah, I couldn't resist, guys. When I've watched Jalen McMillan snaps over the last 2 weeks, I came away so impressed with the former Washington Husky and what he was doing. And when I saw the line at 36.5 yards at minus 115, listen, I didn't need prop to say it earlier in the show, but if there is no such thing as a trap line and just simply inefficiencies all over the place, then I would qualify this as one of those inefficient lines because Jalen McMillan has been really impressive over the last 2 weeks. He's had at least 4 catches in each game. His reception prop line is at plus money at 3.5. I thought about taking that one. I think this one is easier because it's only 36.5 yards at minus 115. And speaking of yardage, he's had at least 59 yards in each of those last 2 games. And he's won on short routes, intermediate routes, in-breaking routes, out-breaking routes. You name it, he's done it. In that respect, he's better than Marvin Harrison because Harrison hasn't won on every type of route in the tree, and Jalen McMillan has. The Cowboys' pass defense, bottom 10 in defensive EPA on the season, bottom 5 in yards after catch per reception against wide receivers. If they miss a tackle on this guy, he could pick up 38 yards in a blink. And in their past 5 games, the Cowboys have allowed a grand total. This is not an average. This is just a raw stat of 884 receiving yards. 884 to wide receivers in their past 5 games. It's the 4th most in football. And it's happened because teams continually throw on them. They lean on their wide receivers. I fully expect Tampa Bay to do the exact same thing. Cade Otton is doubtful for the game. Sterling Shepard has become an afterthought. And the running backs, as great as they've been through the passing game, they've kind of been ignored a little bit. Maybe not so much in the red zone, but just in general, not the same type of high target volume for them. And over the last 2 weeks, I think it's because of Jalen McMillan. Tack on the fact that I think this is going to be a competitive game, And that's where we're at with Jalen McMillan getting 37 yards. Feels like he can do that in a half. I really like this one over 36.5 yards, minus 115.
All right. I appreciate that one. All right, Proppy, we have given out all overs. We need a Propstarz special. It's time for an underline. Who is it?
Yeah, this is an interesting one, guys. It's going to be a guy that I like quite a bit. Darnell Mooney. I'm going to go under 52.5 receiving yards. It's been a reclamation season for Darnell Mooney. If we recall, over the course of his career, had a decent rookie season, had a big sophomore campaign, and then followed that up with just 2 terrible seasons back-to-back in Chicago. Ended up signing the deal with Atlanta in the offseason. Looked like more of like an ancillary piece, but really has been phenomenal for the Falcons. He's been Kirk Cousins' second most reliable target. It's almost a 1B to Drake London's 1A. He's been very productive in that offense. But I mentioned Kirk Cousins here, and that's significant because Michael Penix Jr. Is taking over under center for the Falcons. And if we look at Darnell Mooney's production here, some of it indicates to me that a lot of it more is him being a favorite of Kirk Cousins versus him being a real focal point in the Atlanta offense. So if we look at the 16% first read target rate, that to me is a strong indication, again, that Darnell Mooney, they're not Atlanta, when they're putting together their offensive game plan, aren't really making him a major priority in that offense. So now we're facing the New York Giants with a rookie signal caller. I expect minimal dropbacks for Michael Penix. I expect Bijan Robinson to have a significant workload, and I just don't see Penix really having to drop back more than 26 to 28. I'd be surprised if he dropped back over 30 times in this football game. We don't know how the targets are going to be distributed, who his favorite guys are, but there's multiple mouths to feed in the offense when he does drop back. The forgotten man, Kyle Pitts, Drake London, obviously, Ray McLeod. So I just think 52.5 receiving yards should be if Kirk Cousins was under center, and what should be a neutral game script, which I don't expect to be the case. I expect Atlanta to lean heavily on the run, minimal passing volume, and I think this number is high even in a friendly matchup against the Giants, who I expect Atlanta to really run against, not really need to air the ball out. I think it's unlikely that the Giants are able to force Atlanta to abandon the run into a pass-heavy game script. So I just think it's a big number. I know it's a little speculative here, but I think it should be maybe 45.5 yards considering who's under center and the opponent here. So I'll fade Darnell Mooney in this spot, guys.
Hey, Prop, would you play a correlated play? You mentioned Bijan. Drew in the chat asks over 18.5 rushing attempts. Would you say that's a nice correlated play with Mooney's under?
I do think so. I'm tempted, if I'm taking him over 18.5 rushing attempts, to take his yards at 90, because I'd be surprised if he goes 19 and doesn't end up for 90 rushing yards. But yeah, I do think it's solid to pair the both.
Uncle Dave, you had mentioned on your McMillan prop, how high would you go on that on Sunday Night Football?
I would take it north of 39.5. Let's call it 40.5.
Okay, fair enough. You know, in the offseason, we did a few of these NFL draft shows leading up to it, and we talked a lot about different prospects, especially from a fantasy or prop betting perspective. And I want to give Proppy his due right off the bat and admit where I was wrong. I came out and I said, Marvin Harrison is going to be the best receiver in this class by far. And you said, nope, Brian Thomas and Malik Neighbors are going to be better. Not necessarily in order. You said Neighbors and Thomas, the LSU guys. And guess what? You're right. You were right. I was wrong. So therefore, I'm going with a Proppy special of Brian Thomas Jr. over 72.5 receiving yards. Don't worry, Dave. I have a question for you about this one in a second. But since week 10, Brian Thomas Jr. has a 27% target share and 33% first read share. He has 36 total targets in his last 3. Mac Jones is peppering him. He's gone well over this number in those 4 games. So here's the weird thing about this, though. Las Vegas, and I think Thomas will get that because the volume is going to be there. Las Vegas has only allowed one 100-yard receiver this season. Any guesses from you guys to who that 100-yard receiver would be.
Oh,
I will give you a hint. He is not on an NFL roster at this minute. Yep.
meaning he was cut?
He has been
I
cut.
know who it is.
Go ahead, Uncle Dave. Go ahead. Who is it?
Deontay Johnson.
Deontay Johnson was cut by the Ravens today when he was on Carolina early in the season when Andy Dalton took over at quarterback for Bryce Young. I think it was week 3. He topped 100 yards against Las Vegas. Nonetheless, I think Brian Thomas Jr. gets this done and goes, I think he goes over 80 yards again. I just think the volume, as I said, he's averaging 12 targets a game. Proppy, you have any thoughts on this one, on Brian Thomas Jr.?
I like this quite a bit. This is one I gave a good look to. It is a big number. That was what ultimately prevented me from going with it. But I do like the spot quite a bit. And I've been obviously very encouraged by his production. And, even the quarterback's been playing fairly well there. So I think it's a good spot, and I like it quite a bit.
Well, thank you. So, Uncle Dave, I looked at, I put this together, and then I go and I verify, and I look at your PPR rankings on CBSSports.com, and you have BTJ as 4th. I mean, that is a lofty ranking. Why so high, in your opinion?
Because he's an outstanding high-volume target getter and an explosive pass catcher for the Jaguars, and we've seen him have success with Mac Jones. And I spend a lot more time than a normal person should on games that really don't matter or unpopular NFL games. And this is one where, I'm trying to get a grip on the game script and how I think it's going to go. I'm not messing around. I think the Raiders play with a lead in this game, and I think that forces Jacksonville to throw. And I think that means double-digit targets for Brian Thomas Jr., and I think this line really should be a little higher than it is. I think it's high to begin with just because the odds makers need to puff it up a little bit to try and protect themselves. But I don't think this is a situation at all where Jacksonville is going to be able to run the ball successfully against the Raiders. Their defense has actually gotten better, Vegas's defense. And so I think that this is where Brian Thomas Jr. just takes advantage of getting good volume and being an explosive player. And last thing, for this year, there's no question. Marvin Harrison Jr. is not even close to the best receiver in the NFL among the rookies. But I would say give him time. I don't like how he was used this year. And, Proppy talked about that A dot. He hasn't been great on that A dot. And he doesn't get targeted a lot when his routes are shorter and closer to the line of scrimmage. So I think the Cardinals need to figure that out. And once they do, and they give Harrison the volume, I think you'll see Marvin Harrison become a very, very good NFL receiver. Can he be as good as Neighbors and Thomas, though? I think I'd be silly if I said yes to that.
Well, let's talk about some passing props. And speaking of quarterbacks, so Malik Neighbors and Brian Thomas Jr. played at LSU with the number 2 overall pick in this year's NFL draft, and Jaden Daniels. Mm-hmm. Well, ironically, we've talked about Brian Thomas, so I don't want to say this is a correlated parlay, but we have a Jaden Daniels prop from you. What do you have, Uncle Dave?
I like the pass attempts to go over 30.5, and the juice is low, -103. He's been over this in 4 of his past 5, including 32 attempts against Philadelphia in Week 11. And I figure Washington will not play with much of a lead in this game, and that's going to force Jaden Daniels to throw, which the Commanders have clearly been okay with in the past month. He had 34 more pass attempts in 4 of 5 losses. So if you think that the Eagles are going to win this game, then certainly you could expect Jaden Daniels to throw a lot. But check this out. He's been over this just twice in the Commanders' wins this year. So if you think the Commanders are going to win, I wouldn't take this prop. But I don't think that's going to happen. And I do think it's going to actually be a competitive game. And I think that Philadelphia's run defense, their pass rush, going to get stronger, going to be harder for Brian Robinson to make some plays on the ground. I think Jaden Daniels, though, has got his groove back. We've seen it over the last few weeks. He's running a little bit more, and that's why I'm okay with the prop line at 30.5 and not, say, 32.5, 33.5, because some of his dropbacks will turn into runs. He will scramble a little bit. But I do ultimately believe that this will be a competitive game, and because Washington will struggle to run the football, Jaden Daniels will throw the football, and we'll see him get 31 to 35 attempts in the game. So this is
I think that
low juice that I would be happy to take.
And I think the fact that you would go even higher on that, because I think this line will go up there. Philadelphia has won 10 straight games, and you're looking at a team and they kind of put it on Washington in the second half when they played in November. I wouldn't be surprised to see the Commanders in comeback mode in the second half, where Daniels is chucking and ducking. I'm sorry, Uncle Dave. I could actually see this going up to 40. I mean, I could see them having to throw the entirety of the second half, where we're just running Saquon Barkley on the ground for Philadelphia, and we're chucking and ducking with the Commanders.
Yeah, I don't know about 40.5, because I'm not sure if Saquon is rolling like we know Saquon to roll, then time of possession will be in Philadelphia's favor, and that will hurt Jane Daniels. It's exactly the type of thing that's hurt me on some of these props before. So let's just keep it at 30.5, maybe 31.5, and that's it. If it's higher than that, I would stay away.
Matt in the chat says, "Gonna shock the world, Uncle Dave. Commanders are winning this one. They had a fourth quarter lead in the last game."
They did.
Yes, but Philly put it on them pretty good. They couldn't stop Saquon Barkley in the end.
True.
I don't see that they have an answer for Barkley. Somebody in the chat earlier asked about Barkley's longest rush yard. Sites 501. His longest rush over 17.5 has hit for 5 straight weeks, with his lowest being 18 yards. Any thoughts on that?
I can't imagine it not happening again. That's one I wish I had seen.
Interesting. All right, fair enough. You have another play. I'm going to let you go again here. And this is an interesting one. Speaking of longest play, you love playing this market. I stay away because I'm just awful at it. Russell Wilson against Baltimore. Ravens have not been a very good pass defense this year. So are we thinking good or bad for
I'm thinking bad. I think the Steelers are in a tough spot in this game. Ravens certainly looked great last week. And granted, they took on the Giants. Everybody looks good against the Giants. Just wait till you see the Falcons defense against the Giants. But I think they're in a bad spot. And especially with George Pickens not playing for the Pittsburgh Steelers, I'm going to take the under on Russell Wilson's longest completion. I'm going to say it's under 34.5 yards at minus 125. He has not hit a pass for that long in each of his past 2 games, neither of which featured George Pickens on the field. He has 10 completions of 35-plus yards this year. Half of them are with George Pickens. The other half, his other receivers on the team. In his past 2 games, Calvin Austin's ADOT, lower, 10.78. Van Jefferson's ADOT, higher, 17.67. But he only has 1 target, over 30 air yards in the game. And the longest catch that anybody's had from Russell Wilson, 31 yards. It was last week. The next longest was 22 yards, not even in the same ballpark as 34.5. Now let's talk about the Ravens defense. They have they've seen the 6 most passes of 30 or more air yards against them, and 7 of them have been completed. That sounds like a terrible average, but that's actually a lot. However, in their last 4 games, and this is where I will say that the Ravens are getting better against the pass, just 1 completion of 30 or more air yards. And it was to George Pickens. Past 4 games, Baltimore tops in the NFL. 2.8 yards after catch per receptions allowed to wide receivers. 4th in yards after catch per reception, 4.6 yards to anybody. So they are tackling players before they can make a big play. So this will take away the idea of Jaylen Warren catching a screen and turning it into 35 yards. Could it happen? Yes. But the Ravens have been really stingy against those types of things happening. Nate Wiggins, their rookie cornerback, he's been playing well. Brandon Stevens has been solid. Marlon Humphrey, he hasn't had his best year, but he hasn't allowed a reception and coverage of more than 21 yards. The Ravens are going to continue to play zone against the Steelers. That will eliminate the big play, theoretically. They will try and deter them and Russell Wilson to check down. And when he's pressured, and you know the Ravens are going to think about pressuring him, he has a 45% completion rate. Although I must say, last time these teams played, the Ravens held back their blitz. They did not blitz Russell Wilson very much. They still got some pressure on him, and Russ only had the 1 catch, and it was to Pickens. I think it makes a world of difference that Pickens doesn't play. I think Russell Wilson sees just modest production through the air. This is my favorite under to take from the Steelers this week. It's under 34.5 yards for Russell Wilson's longest completion.
I think Baltimore puts it on Pittsburgh this week. I'm not, Pittsburgh could make it a game late, but I think Baltimore wins this one handily, and I also would take the over as well. Some of you in the chat may be wondering, where's Proppy? Unfortunately, he's a little under the weather. We may have him back later in the show, but you got all his picks. He had 3 picks for us this week, so you got that. So you have Uncle Dave and I breaking things down. We're going to get to some of your picks in the chat. I want to run them by Uncle Dave, but first, I have a passing prop I want to mention. So Uncle Dave mentioned earlier in the show Jalen McMillan. He has played his over. I think it was 36.5, 37.5 yards. I'm going Baker Mayfield over 256.5 passing plus rushing yards at minus 115. So our AI model has him for 309 yards total. So we see some value there. He's averaging 278 passing yards per game during this current 4-game Tampa Bay winning streak, and he's averaging 19 rushing yards per game this season. Now, against Dallas, starting quarterbacks are averaging 236 passing yards and 33 rushing yards a game, which is well over this number. We can all hit all three of our Buccaneers plays. Proppy's Bucky Irving on the ground, Dave's Jalen McMillan play, and my Baker Mayfield play. This game should be higher scoring. We should see points. Tampa Bay's offense is on fire right now, so I'm going to play Baker Mayfield. With this combo line, I think it's a few yards too low. I would play it up to 260, maybe a little bit over 260 if it goes in that direction for Baker Mayfield on Sunday night. All right, Dave, I want to get a few of these in here that we've had throughout the show. Nicholas, a little bit earlier, said thoughts on Breece Hall over 53.5 rushing yards against the Rams.
I think they want you to take the under. So if that means taking the over, then you can go ahead and do it. I'm not impressed with the Rams' run defense lately, certainly not on the year either. And Breece Hall isn't on the injury report. Fingers crossed that he looks a lot better than he did last week.
How do you feel about Cooper Kupp bouncing back in this game? The line, Johnny asks, is 55.5. Do you like Cooper Kupp, or is this a stay away situation?
You know, I think I'd rather play the receptions total or the anytime touchdown total, or that's it, not the yardage. We've seen that go very volatile over the last couple of months, really since he's been back.
So Kale in the chat put in a couple of different ones, and I'm going to ask you which one of these you like better. Okay. Sam Laporta's over 41.5 receiving yards. That's his favorite prop of the week. Or Aaron Rodgers under 240.5 passing yards.
I don't love either one. With Rodgers, I feel like he's just going to do what he wants to do in the offense. Rams are better against the pass than they are against the run. I really don't know what to make of Breece Hall and whether or not he's, just because he's not on the injury report, he's just absolutely good to go. And then do you really think that the Jets are just, or not the Jets, do you really think that Aaron Rodgers is just going to hand off 30 times a game and throw 25 times? I think it's actually going to be a competitive, high-scoring game. And so I kind of like the over for Aaron Rodgers more than the under.
The other thing about that is if you want to play the over with Aaron Rodgers, especially in a DFS stack, look for Davante Adams. Boy, I mean, how about Davante Adams getting shut out last week and then has, 190 yards in the second half?
He had almost all of it in the fourth quarter. It was a tour de force in the fourth quarter against a terrible Jaguars defense. One of the props I was thinking about I looked at both Brock Bowers and Jacoby Myers a lot this week, looking at their overs, thinking, it makes sense because Jacksonville's defense is so bad, but their run defense is bad too. And there's certain things that schematically the Jaguars do that hurts Jacoby Myers. And so I couldn't handle that. And then I'm just not sure how much volume Brock Bowers is going to get. Michael Mayer's been playing. He might take some of those tight end targets away. And the one that I was really close to giving was Alexander Madison's rushing yards, because I think he could end up getting a decent amount of work and doing moderately well. I think it would be kind of a serious sweat, but I think he can get you 50 rushing yards.
Well, I have another play in that game, the last play that I'll give out, but we'll wait until the next segment before we do that. Just want to remind you can make all these bets at BetMGM, and they have a great promotion for football season that you definitely want to check out if you aren't familiar. We've all had our first touchdown bet called back before, and BetMGM is giving you a second chance. With BetMGM's Pro Football Second Chance, place any first touchdown scorer bet, and if your player doesn't score first but scores second, get your entire stake back in cash. No opt-in required. Here's how it works. Place a pregame straight first touchdown score bet in any NFL game. If your player scores the first touchdown of the game, you win your wager as normal. If your player scores the second touchdown of the game, you'll get your stake back in cash. It's that simple. Log into BetMGM for more details. Coming up next, another play in the Jaguars-Raiders game. I can't believe I'm doing that. Plus a kicker parlay that you won't forget anytime soon after we hear from one of our sponsors. Oh, Oh, how cool is that? We're seeing Masters promos already. We're only 3 months away or 4 months away. I cannot wait. One of the best times of the year. That's not during football season, is Masters time. All right, here we go. Ready for this one. Cam Little of the Jaguars over 1.5 made field goals at minus 125. So he's over this in 3 of his last 4. He's had 10 field goal attempts in that span. The Raiders are tied at the top of the NFL with 33 made field goals allowed. So the volume should be there. And kickers are over this in 11 of 14 games against Jacksonville this season. So we're playing this over for Cam Little at minus 125. Now, I wasn't going to leave you guys high and dry. Earlier in the season, producer Jake said to me, you got to put together a banger of a parlay. Okay, and this was whatever, it was a Monday night game or something like that. And then we talked about it last week, and, I put one together then. It was a little conservative. He said, that's not good enough. Jake, do you approve of this one right now? Look at this. This is a 5-leg kicker parlay. We're going Harrison Butker tomorrow against the Texans, who, by the way, have given up 11 50-yard field goals this season. Chris Boswell, who's one of the best kickers this year. I think he has the most made field goals, over 1.5 against Baltimore, who've given up a lot. How about Eddie Pinheiro for the Panthers against the Cardinals, who are top 10 in kicker points allowed to, or fantasy points allowed to kickers? We have Joshua Carty against the Jets, who've been very kind to kickers as well. And we'll close it out with Cam Little against the Raiders, which is my play. Now, this 5-legger will pay almost 22 to 1. And Uncle Dave said last week that you put no more than $2 on a parlay like this. So there, for you, Uncle Dave, is a $2 kicker parlay at almost 22 to 1. Once again, feel free to put more than $2 on it because I will.
And you'll be able to buy a certain NBA player who's in the Hall of Fame a glass of his favorite tequila with your winnings.
Yes, because that was not cheap. Even still, I will tell you, the winnings for that parlay were still less than what that tequila shot cost.
Yeah, of course.
I mean, how much is tequila shot? These are things I don't know. I'm naive in life. All right, let's get to the recap screen. Let's bring it up.
Better you do not know how much expensive tequila shots are. Trust me.
I'm a naive guy, Uncle Dave. That's just one thing. I'm unaware of certain things. I thought a tequila shot $20. No, it's more than that. We'll just say that. But it was fun. Charles Barkley, he loves to bet these. Not props, though, but we'll get him watching this show, and maybe he'll change his mind. All right, let's bring in the recap screen and talk about it. Propstarz was on Bucky Irving over 56.5 rushing yards for 1.5 units. Marvin Harrison Jr. over 49.5 receiving yards, and Darnell Mooney under 52.5 receiving yards. Uncle Dave is on Jaden Daniels over 30.5 passing attempts. That line, Matt pointed out on one of the sports books, is 29.5 as well. So Uncle Dave likes that to go over that one. Russell Wilson under 34.5 for his longest completion. James Conner over 106.5 combined yards for 1.5 units, and Jalen McMillan over 37.5 receiving yards. I am on Baker Mayfield over 256.5 passing plus rushing yards. James Conner over 80.5 rushing yards for 1.5 units. Brian Thomas Jr. over 72.5 receiving yards at minus 120. That Trey McBride anytime touchdown, he hasn't had one all year. Carolina's given up the most touchdowns to tight ends at plus 135, and Cam Little over 1.5 field goals at minus 125. All right, Uncle Dave, what's your favorite prop on the board that is not yours, or my James Conner one?
Yeah, so I was going to say the James Conner one. It's the Brian Thomas Jr. over 72.5 receiving yards. I think that he can get over that, but it's based on volume. This can't be a game where Brian Thomas only gets like 5 targets, but I don't know if he's capable of that. I don't think the Jaguars are dumb enough to do such a thing. So high number for sure, but asking him to get 75 to 120 yards, I don't think anybody would say that that's impossible. No way that happens. And by the way, the other one that I like a lot is the Cam Little prop over 1.5 field goals, because you mentioned it, 11 of 14 games, the Raiders have given up at least 2 made field goals.
We're trying. We're gonna bounce back this week, but I want to say something before we get going here. We have been very lucky to have our buddy, producer Jake, to work with him for several years now. He's become a friend to all of us, and I know Proppy, if he was on this show, would say the same. Jake, this is obviously your last show, and Sia talked about it on the morning show. We are so grateful to have worked with you and to call you a friend thank you for everything you've done for me personally and for all of us. Dave, any thoughts?
No, we will miss Jake tremendously.
That we will. And thank him for everything. And we will do our best to keep it up every week as we go along. We will certainly miss our friend Jake and wish him nothing but the best. The guy is a star and will continue to be a star going forward. And we'll see him down the road. I'm confident. All right. It's been a fun show. I want to thank Jake for all of his work behind the scenes. For Proppy and Uncle Dave, I am EC. And before I get into my tagline here, hold on. Merry Christmas. Happy holidays to all of you out there. We'll be back here next Friday, but want to wish everybody out there Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, Happy Holidays. Hope you have a great time and a safe time next week. But as I always like to say, let's hit it big. Good luck.